Mama, why are you crying?
I'm not crying, baby. Just tired. Go back to bed.
You've been staring at that piece of paper for an hour. Is it about my birthday?
Linda, if you found something that didn't belong to you, something really, really valuable, what would you do?
Give it back. You always say that's what good people do.
Yeah, that's what good people do.
Then why do you look so sad, Mama? Did you do something bad?
No, baby. I did something good. I don't know if good is enough anymore.
Mama, you're scaring me.
Sometimes, sweetheart, doing the right thing costs everything. And I'm about to find out just how much.
This is the story of a woman who made one honest decision, and how that single choice set off a chain of events that would shock an entire city, expose a betrayal so cruel it seemed unforgivable, and ultimately prove that sometimes the universe is watching closer than we think. But before we get to the diamond, the arrest, and the millionaire who changed everything, we need to go back. Back to where Miriam's story really began. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days before that late-night conversation. Before the stranger at table 12. Before everything fell apart, and then impossibly came back together. This is her story, and I promise you, you've never heard anything quite like it. Before we proceed, permit me to welcome you, my lovely family, to another heartwarming story. If you're new here, we wholeheartedly welcome you. To cement your place in this community, please hit the subscribe button now. Don't also forget to hit the notification icon bell to ensure you are the first to see our new story tomorrow. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. That's how long it had been since Miriam's world collapsed. Not gradually, not with warning, but in a single, devastating moment on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when 2 police officers knocked on her door to tell her that her husband, David, wouldn't be coming home. Ever. A drunk driver. Wrong place, wrong time. The kind of senseless tragedy that makes you question everything you thought you knew about fairness and justice and the way the world is supposed to work. David had been her everything. Her high school sweetheart. Her best friend. The father of her beautiful daughter Linda, who had just turned 5 years old when suddenly, she had to learn what forever meant. And Miriam, at 31 years old, had to figure out how to be both mother and father, how to pay bills that had always been split between 2 incomes, how to answer a little girl's questions about why daddy wasn't at her ballet recital, her school play, her bedtime story routine. The life insurance helped for a while. Enough to bury David properly, to keep the lights on for 6 months, to pretend that maybe, just maybe, they'd be okay. But insurance money runs out. Grief doesn't. And neither do bills. Miriam had been a substitute teacher before Linda was born, working on her credentials to become a full-time educator. She loved teaching, loved watching children's faces light up when they finally understood a concept they'd been struggling with. She had dreams, plans, a future mapped out in her mind. But dreams don't pay rent. And when you're a single mother with a young daughter and no family to lean on, your parents having passed years before, David's family scattered across different states with their own struggles. Sometimes dreams have to wait. Sometimes they have to die altogether. The Rosewood Diner wasn't where Miriam imagined herself at 34. The fluorescent lights were too bright. The floors perpetually sticky despite constant mopping. The smell of grease embedded so deep in her uniform that no amount of washing could remove it completely. But it was work, steady work, and Steve, the manager, had hired her without asking too many questions, without judging the 3-year gap in her resume, without making her explain why her hands shook during the interview. She worked the morning shift 6 days a week, 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., sometimes longer if someone called in sick, which happened more often than it should. The pay was minimum wage plus tips, and in a neighborhood like theirs, tips weren't exactly generous. Most days, she walked out with maybe $30, $40 in her apron pocket. On good days, $50. On bad days, the kind where every customer seemed determined to make her life harder, maybe $20. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Linda was 8 now, growing faster than Miriam could keep up with. Shoes that fit in September were too small by December. School supplies, field trip fees, the occasional book fair where Linda would look at Miriam with those hopeful eyes, asking so quietly if maybe, just maybe, they could afford one book. Just one. Miriam said yes more often than she should. Because what kind of mother tells her daughter she can't have a $5 book? What kind of mother watches her child try to make herself smaller, to want less, to apologize for needing things that every child should have without question? The apartment they lived in was small. 1 bedroom, which Linda had, while Miriam slept on a pull-out couch in the living room that had seen better decades. The heating was unreliable in winter, the air conditioning non-existent in summer. The walls were thin enough that they could hear their neighbors' arguments, their television shows, their entire lives playing out in uncomfortable proximity. But it was home, or at least it had been home for the past 2 years. Ever since they'd been priced out of the slightly better apartment they'd moved to after David died. Rent kept going up. Miriam's wages didn't. She had medical bills too. From a bad fall last year that resulted in a sprained ankle and an emergency room visit she couldn't afford but couldn't avoid. The hospital had been understanding, setting up a payment plan that took a chunk out of every paycheck. Insurance through the diner was a joke, covering almost nothing while costing too much. Every month was a calculation. Rent first, always rent, because without a roof over their heads, nothing else mattered. Then utilities, because Linda needed lights to do her homework, needed heat so she wouldn't get sick. Then food, stretching every dollar at the discount grocery store, buying the dented cans and day-old bread, learning to make meals out of almost nothing. Rice and beans became gourmet in Miriam's hands, not by choice but by necessity. What was left over, the tiny sliver of remaining money, got divided between everything else. Linda's school needs, the payment plan for medical bills, the slowly growing credit card debt that Miriam tried not to think about because thinking about it meant acknowledging how deep the hole had become, how impossible climbing out seemed. She was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from treading water for so long that you've forgotten what solid ground feels like. Every morning, Miriam woke up at 4:30 a.m., got ready in the dark so she wouldn't wake Linda, left a note on the kitchen counter with instructions for breakfast and reminders to lock the door, to go straight to school, to be careful. Linda was so responsible for 8 years old. Too responsible. She'd learned to be independent because she had to learn to microwave her own meals and do her own homework and tuck herself in at night when Miriam worked double shifts. She never complained, never asked why other kids had both parents, had bigger homes, had new clothes instead of thrift store finds. That broke Miriam's heart more than anything. Stories like Miriam's are more common than we want to admit, aren't they? Single parents working multiple jobs, choosing between medicine and meals, loving their children fiercely while feeling like they're failing them constantly. If you're watching this and you've ever felt that kind of pressure, that kind of impossible weight, you're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, this story will remind you why it's worth staying, why it matters to see these journeys through to the end. Because what happens to Miriam, what's about to unfold in her life, it matters. Not just for her, but for everyone who's ever wondered if doing the right thing is worth it when the world seems determined to punish you for it. Linda's 9th birthday was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks, and Miriam had exactly $73 saved in an envelope hidden in her underwear drawer. Not enough for the bicycle Linda had mentioned, just once, looking at a poster in a store window. Not enough for the party that other kids got, with cake and decorations and friends and presents. Maybe enough for a small cake from the grocery store. Maybe enough for one modest gift. Maybe. Miriam tried not to cry about it. Tried not to let Linda see the defeat in her eyes. The shame of being a mother who couldn't give her daughter what she deserved. But late at night, alone on that pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling with its water stains and cracks, Miriam let herself feel everything she kept bottled up during the day. She was doing her best, her absolute best, working every shift available, being honest and kind to customers even when they were rude, even when they left messes and no tips, even when her feet ached and her back screamed, and all she wanted was to collapse. She followed the rules, paid her taxes, taught Linda right from wrong, tried to be the kind of person David would have been proud of. And it still wasn't enough. That's where Miriam was, emotionally and financially, on the Tuesday morning that changed everything. The morning a stranger walked into the Rosewood Diner and sat down at table 12. The morning that would test every principle Miriam had ever held, every lesson she taught her daughter about honesty and integrity and doing the right thing even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She had no way of knowing, as she tied her apron and started her shift that morning, that the next few weeks would push her to the absolute edge, that she'd face a choice between survival and honesty, that doing the right thing would cost her more than she imagined possible, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe keeps better accounts than we think. The man walked in at exactly 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday. Miriam noticed him immediately, not because he was particularly loud or demanding, but because he was so carefully quiet. In a diner full of construction workers grabbing coffee, nurses ending night shifts, and bleary-eyed college students, this man stood out precisely because he seemed to be trying not to. He was older, maybe late 50s, with silver hair and a face that suggested he smiled often but wasn't smiling now. His clothes were expensive. Anyone could see that. The kind of subtle wealth that doesn't announce itself with logos but whispers through quality fabric and perfect tailoring. A charcoal suit that probably cost more than Miriam made in 3 months. Shoes so polished they reflected the diner's lights. He sat at table 12, the corner booth by the window. It was Miriam's section. She approached with her notepad and her practiced smile, the one that hid exhaustion and worry and the constant mental calculation of bills. "Good morning, what can I get started for you today?" The words came automatically after 3 years of saying them dozens of times every shift. The man looked up at her, and something in his expression made Miriam pause. He wasn't looking at her the way most customers did, that quick assessment before returning to their phones or newspapers. He was actually seeing her, noticing the name tag slightly crooked on her uniform, the faded patches where the fabric had been washed too many times, the careful way she stood, weight shifted slightly off her left foot where the old injury still bothered her on long shifts. "Just coffee," he said, "black, and whatever's good for breakfast." "Surprise me." Miriam recommended the Tuesday special, 2 eggs any style with hash browns and toast, and he nodded without looking at the menu. She brought him coffee in the chipped ceramic mug they used for everyone, poured it carefully, and left him alone. That's what you learned in this job. Reading people, knowing who wanted conversation and who wanted solitude. This man wanted to watch. Over the next hour, Miriam went about her work, barely noticing him except when she refilled his coffee. But he noticed her. Noticed how she helped an elderly woman cut her pancakes when arthritis made it difficult. Noticed how she patiently took an order from a man who couldn't decide, changing his mind 4 times without a trace of irritation showing on her face. Noticed how she cleaned up a spill from a toddler's dropped juice without making the embarrassed mother feel worse. Noticed how she quietly paid for a homeless man's coffee out of her own tip jar when he came up short. The stranger watched it all. Watched Miriam treat every person who walked through that door with the same respect, regardless of how they were dressed, how much they ordered, whether they tipped well or tipped at all. watched her smile at the construction workers' rough jokes, console a woman who'd clearly been crying, help a confused tourist with directions. He watched her character reveal itself in 100 small moments. When he finally stood to leave, placing exact cash on the table for his bill plus a reasonable tip, nothing excessive that would draw attention, Miriam was taking an order 3 tables away. She gave him a small wave, the kind of acknowledgement servers give regulars, even though he'd never been there before. The man walked out into the morning sun and disappeared. It was 20 minutes later when Miriam went to clear table 12. She stacked the dishes, wiped down the surface, and was reaching for the tip when something caught the light. Something that definitely wasn't there when she'd served breakfast. Something that made her hand freeze midair and her breath catch in her throat. There, sitting exactly where the man's coffee cup had been, was a stone. But not just any stone. Even with Miriam's limited knowledge of jewelry, even in the harsh fluorescent lighting of a roadside diner, she knew she was looking at something extraordinary. It was roughly the size of a large marble, uncut but unmistakably precious. The way it captured light, throwing tiny rainbows across the table's surface. The weight of it when she picked it up with trembling fingers. The absolute clarity, like holding a piece of compressed starlight. A diamond, a raw, uncut diamond. Miriam's first thought was that it had to be fake. Some kind of crystal, a paperweight, a prop from a movie. Because real diamonds didn't just appear on diner tables. Real diamonds didn't get left behind like forgotten sunglasses. Her second thought was panic. Someone had lost something valuable. Someone was going to come back looking for it. Frantic and upset. She needed to keep it safe. Her third thought, the one that came with a wave of shame, was about Linda's birthday. About the $73 that wouldn't buy a bicycle. About how something like this could change everything. She pushed that thought away so hard it left a bruise on her conscience. Miriam looked around the diner. The morning rush was settling into the mid-morning lull. A few tables occupied, nobody paying attention to her. She could slip the diamond into her apron pocket. Walk to the back. No one would know. No one except her. And Linda, eventually, when she asked where the money came from. Miriam closed her fingers around the stone, feeling its cool weight, its sharp edges. Then she walked straight to the back office where Steve was doing paperwork, spreadsheets illuminated on an old computer screen. She knocked on the door frame. Steve looked up, irritated at the interruption. "Someone left this on table 12, Miriam said, holding out her hand. Steve's expression changed the moment he saw what she was holding. Changed from irritation to shock to something else. Something Miriam didn't quite recognize. His eyes went wide. He stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. Is that he started, then stopped. He reached out, not quite touching it yet. Is that real? I think so, Miriam said. I don't know. But it was just sitting there after a customer left. I wanted to report it right away, in case he comes back looking for it. Steve took the diamond from her hand, held it up to the light. His face had gone pale, then flushed. Miriam watched him calculate, watched thoughts race behind his eyes. You did the right thing, he finally said. Absolutely the right thing. I'll put it in the safe. If anyone comes back asking, we'll have it ready to return. Should we, call the police? Miriam asked. File a report or something. If it's valuable, no need to get police involved yet, Steve said quickly. Let's give it a few days. See if the owner comes back. These things usually work themselves out. Guy probably realizes it's missing and comes right back. You remember what he looked like? Miriam described the stranger as best she could. Older gentleman, silver hair, expensive suit. Came in around 7:40. Had the Tuesday special. Steve nodded, writing nothing down. I'll handle it, he said. You did good, Miriam. Really good. Shows character, turning in something like this instead of keeping it. Miriam felt a warmth in her chest at the praise. When you're barely holding your life together, when every day feels like failure, being told you did something right matters more than it should. It's not mine, she said simply. That's all. She went back to her shift. Back to taking orders and refilling coffee and wiping down tables. Back to her normal routine, feeling lighter somehow. Feeling like she'd passed a test she didn't know she was taking. In his office, Steve stared at the diamond in his hand. Stared at it for a long time, thinking about his gambling debts. About the creditors who'd started calling at all hours. About how something this small could solve everything, could make all his problems disappear. Just one small stone. One honest waitress who'd never know the difference. He slipped it into his pocket and locked the office door behind him. 5 days passed, then 7, then 10. Miriam thought about the diamond more than she wanted to admit. Wondered if the man had come back. Wondered what something like that was worth. Not in a greedy way, but in the curious way you might wonder about things that exist in a world completely separate from your own. She imagined it was probably worth a few $1,000s. Maybe enough to buy a decent used car. Maybe enough to pay off some debts. Not her business. It wasn't hers. She'd done the right thing. On day 12, during her shift, she approached Steve. He was refilling napkin dispensers, a task usually left to the servers, but he seemed to be keeping himself busy in the front of the house lately, avoiding the back office. "Hey Steve," Miriam said, wiping down the counter nearby. "That diamond from table 12, did anyone ever come back for it?" Steve's hand paused for just a fraction of a second, then continued smoothly with the napkins. "Oh yeah," he said. "Yeah, guy came back 2 days ago. Real relieved too. Could barely thank me enough." "Really?" Miriam felt genuinely happy. "That's great. I was worried he'd be sick about losing it." "Rich guy," Steve continued, not meeting her eyes. "Barely even seemed that concerned, honestly. Offered a reward and everything, but I told him no need. We're honest people here." Miriam smiled. That made her feel good, knowing the story had a happy ending. Knowing that her honesty had meant something, that somewhere out there, a man had his valuable possession back because she'd made the right choice. "That's a relief," she said. "I was starting to worry." "Nothing to worry about," Steve said. "All taken care of." He walked away before she could say anything else. Moved on to checking inventory, to adjusting the thermostat, to any task that kept him moving, kept him from having to look at her directly. Miriam went back to work with a lighter heart. See, she told herself, good things happen to good people. Not immediately, not in obvious ways, but the universe keeps track. Karma is real. Integrity matters. She needed to believe that. Needed to believe that the struggle was worth it. That teaching Linda about honesty and character wasn't setting her daughter up for a harder life, but a better one. Meanwhile, Steve's new watch cost $3,000. His gambling debts were paid. His creditors had stopped calling. He'd sold the diamond to a private buyer, no questions asked, for $47,000. A fraction of what it was truly worth. But when you're selling something that isn't yours, you don't negotiate for top dollar. He told himself he'd earned it. Told himself Miriam would have just wasted it anyway, probably gotten scammed or made some foolish decision. Told himself she was fine, still had her job, still making her tips. What she didn't know couldn't hurt her. He avoided her when he could. When he couldn't, he was overly friendly, too cheerful, compensating for the guilt that gnawed at him during quiet moments. Miriam noticed none of this. She was too busy with her own crisis. Linda's birthday was now 1 week away. The $73 had grown to $92 through careful saving. Every tip, every spare dollar. Still not enough for a bicycle, but enough for a nice cake and maybe a couple of small presents. Enough to make her daughter smile. Then the landlord knocked on their door. Rent was going up. Starting next month, an increase of $200. Market rates, he explained, not unkindly but not sympathetically either. This was business. If she couldn't pay, he'd need to know now so he could find new tenants. $200. Might as well have been $2,000. Might as well have been $2 million. Miriam did the math that night, sitting at her kitchen table with bills spread out like accusatory documents. There was no scenario where the numbers worked. No combination of cuts and sacrifices that would cover a $200 monthly increase. She was already stretched beyond breaking, already skipping meals so Linda could eat properly, already walking to work to save bus fare, already buying her clothes at yard sales and her food at dollar stores. There was nothing left to cut, nowhere left to trim. She had two choices. Find a second job, which meant leaving Linda alone even more, meant never seeing her daughter except when she was sleeping. Or move. Find somewhere cheaper, which probably meant a worse neighborhood, a worse school district, further from work. Both options felt like failure. Both options meant admitting she couldn't provide the stability her daughter needed and deserved. That night, after Linda was asleep, Miriam allowed herself to think about the diamond. Really think about it. If she'd kept it, if she'd been a different person, less honest, less principled, what would that have meant? Security, probably. A savings account. Money for emergencies. The ability to give Linda a real birthday party without guilt. She pushed the thought away, but it kept coming back. Kept whispering in her ear during the darkest hours. See what honesty gets you. See what doing the right thing costs. But she couldn't have lived with herself. Couldn't have looked Linda in the eye and preached about integrity while benefiting from theft. Because that's what keeping it would have been. Theft, no matter how she might have justified it. The right thing is still the right thing even when it hurts. Even when it costs everything. Miriam repeated that to herself like a prayer. Work became harder. Every shift felt longer. Every customer who ran her ragged, who left $1 on a $30 check, who treated her like she was invisible or worse, like she was less than human, it all chipped away at her resolve. She smiled through it, said yes ma'am and yes sir and is there anything else I can get you? Cleaned up messes and absorbed abuse and pretended her feet didn't hurt and her back wasn't screaming. She was so tired. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Linda's birthday was 5 days away when Miriam finally broke down and looked at apartments in worse neighborhoods. Places with bars on windows and graffiti on walls. Places where the rent was $200 less but the cost was measured in safety, in peace of mind, in the quality of Linda's education and future. She couldn't do it. Couldn't make that choice. Not yet. Maybe something would change. Maybe a miracle would happen. Maybe the universe that was supposed to reward honesty would finally show up and prove that doing the right thing mattered. You ever notice how we hold on to hope even when logic says we shouldn't? How we keep believing in fairness even when evidence suggests otherwise? Miriam was there in that space between faith and despair. And what happens next? What's about to unfold? It's going to test every belief she's ever held. But here's the thing about these stories, about moments when everything falls apart. Sometimes that's exactly when the truth finally comes to light. Sometimes the breaking point is just the beginning. 3 days before Linda's birthday, everything changed. But not in the way Miriam expected. Not in any way she could have prepared for. The police arrived during the lunch rush. 2 officers in uniform, 1 detective in plain clothes. They walked in like they owned the place, like they'd done this 100 times before, which they probably had. Miriam was taking an order from table 7 when she noticed them. Noticed how they scanned the room with professional detachment. Noticed how they headed straight for the back office. The diner went quiet in that way public spaces do when authority enters. Conversations dropped to whispers. Customers looked up from their phones. Even the cook stuck his head out from the kitchen, spatula still in hand. Miriam felt her stomach drop. Police meant trouble. Police meant something bad had happened. Her mind immediately went to Linda, to the school, to every parent's worst nightmare. She set down her notepad and moved toward the officers, heart pounding. But they weren't looking for her. They were looking for Steve. The detective knocked on the office door once, then opened it without waiting for a response. Steve looked up from his computer, confusion crossing his face before he saw the uniforms. Then the confusion became something else. Fear. Recognition. The face of a man who'd been expecting this but hoping it wouldn't come. Stephen Morrison, the detective said, not a question but a statement. Yes, Steve said, standing up slowly. What's this about? The detective read him his rights. The actual Miranda rights that Miriam had only heard on television. The word surreal in the context of the Rosewood Diner with its smell of coffee and bacon and normalcy. Steve was being arrested. The dining room erupted in whispers. Miriam stood frozen, unable to process what she was seeing. Steve, her manager, the man who'd hired her, who'd praised her for turning in the diamond, was being led out in handcuffs. What did he do? Someone asked. Theft, another person whispered. I heard theft. The officers were professional but firm. Steve didn't resist, didn't make a scene. He looked defeated, like he'd been carrying a weight for so long that putting it down, even like this, was almost a relief. As they led him past Miriam, he glanced at her. Just once. And in that glance was something that made her blood run cold. Guilt. Apology. Shame. Then he was gone. Walked out of the diner and into a police car while everyone watched. While phones came out and people started recording. While Miriam stood there trying to make sense of what had just happened. The assistant manager, a woman named Carol who usually worked evenings, had to take over. She was as confused as everyone else, making phone calls to corporate, trying to calm down staff and customers, trying to keep the business running while police tape went up around Steve's office. It was chaos. Miriam finished her shift in a daze, moved through the motions mechanically, taking orders and delivering food and clearing tables while her mind spun with questions. What had Steve done? Why were the police here? What did it mean for the diner, for her job, for the fragile stability she'd been barely maintaining? It wasn't until later, after her shift ended, that Carol pulled her aside. Miriam, Carol said, her face serious. The detective wants to talk to you. Me? Miriam's heart rate spiked again. Why? I didn't do anything. It's about something you reported. Something you found on a table? The diamond. Everything suddenly made horrible sense. The detective, whose name was Rodriguez, was kind but direct. He explained it in the diner's break room, with Carol present as a witness. A man named Marcus Webb had filed a report about a stolen diamond. A very valuable diamond that had been left intentionally as a gift. The diamond had a microscopic tracking signature, a security feature embedded by Webb diamond collections in all their stones. When the diamond was sold to an underground buyer, the signature pinged their system. The buyer was traced, questioned, and gave up his seller, Steve Morrison, who had no legitimate claim to the diamond, who had, according to transaction records, sold it 12 days after a customer reported finding it. A customer named Miriam. I turned it in, Miriam said, her voice shaking. I found it on a table and I immediately turned it in to Steve. He said he'd keep it safe. He said he told me the owner came back for it. He said it was returned. Detective Rodriguez nodded. We know. Mr. Webb has been very thorough in his investigation. You're not in any trouble, Ms. Miriam. In fact, you're the reason we know the diamond was stolen at all. Your honesty is what started this whole investigation. But I don't understand, Miriam said. Why would someone leave a diamond? Who is Marcus Webb? The detective explained. Marcus Webb owned Webb Diamond Collections, one of the largest diamond jewelry businesses in North America and Europe. He occasionally tested people, left valuable items in situations where honesty was a choice. The diamond left at table 12 had been worth approximately $150,000. Miriam couldn't breathe, couldn't process that number. $150,000. She'd held it in her hand, had turned it in without a second thought, had believed Steve when he said it was returned, had been betrayed so completely it made her physically ill. Mr. Webb will want to speak with you, Rodriguez said. He's been trying to find you since he learned what happened. The diamond was meant for you. It was left specifically for you as a gift. Mr. Morrison stole that gift and sold it for his own profit. The room spun. Miriam had to sit down. $150,000. Meant for her. Stolen from her by a man she'd trusted. While she'd been struggling to save $92 for her daughter's birthday. While she'd been facing eviction. While she'd been wondering if honesty was worth it. Why? She whispered. Why would he give me something like that? The detective smiled slightly. You'll have to ask him yourself. But from what I understand, you showed him something worth more than diamonds. You showed him character. And apparently Mr. Webb values that above everything else. Miriam went home that night in shock. Picked up Linda from the neighbor who watched her after school. Made dinner on autopilot. Helped with homework while her mind replayed everything. The diamond. The betrayal. The value of what she'd lost. Linda noticed her mother was quiet but didn't push. She'd learned to read Miriam's moods, to know when to give her space. That night, after Linda was asleep, Miriam sat on her pull-out couch and cried. Not gentle tears but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from a place of exhaustion and betrayal and bitter irony. She'd done the right thing. She'd been honest. And she'd been punished for it in the cruelest way possible. Steve had taken her miracle and sold it. Had looked her in the eye and lied. Had let her struggle and stress and break herself apart while he paid off his debts and bought a new watch. The universe hadn't rewarded her honesty. It had tested her. And she'd passed. But the prize had been stolen. How was that fair? How was that justice? But something Detective Rodriguez had said stuck with her. Marcus Webb was looking for her. The diamond had been meant for her. And now that the truth was out, now that Steve was arrested, maybe, just maybe, this wasn't over. Maybe the story had another chapter. Miriam didn't let herself hope. Hope had disappointed her too many times. But she also didn't let herself despair. Because she'd learned something over these 3 years of survival. You keep going. You keep showing up. You keep doing the right thing even when it costs you. Because the alternative, becoming someone like Steve, someone who steals and lies and hurts people for personal gain, that cost was higher than any amount of money. That was a price Miriam would never pay. Even if it meant staying poor. Even if it meant struggling. Even if it meant the universe never even the score. She was still herself. Still honest. Still the kind of person who could look her daughter in the eye without shame. That had to count for something. It had to. Marcus Webb had built an empire on 2 principles. Quality and character. The quality of his diamonds was unmatched, certified and authenticated, sourced ethically, cut by master craftsmen. But it was the second principle, character, that truly defined his business philosophy. Because Marcus hadn't been born wealthy, hadn't inherited his fortune or stumbled into success. He'd built it from nothing, from less than nothing, from the kind of poverty that marks you permanently even after you escape it. His mother had been a maid, worked 3 jobs to raise Marcus and his 2 sisters after their father left. Worked until her hands were raw and her back was bent and her spirit, somehow, miraculously, remained unbroken. She taught Marcus everything that mattered. Taught him that your word was your bond. That honesty wasn't just policy, it was identity. That you could lose everything except your character, and as long as you had that, you could rebuild. She died when Marcus was 23, 1 week before his first major business deal closed. 1 week before he could finally give her the life she deserved. He never forgot that timing. Never forgot that his success came too late to share with the person who'd made it possible. So he'd made it his mission to find people like his mother. People who worked hard, who stayed honest, who did the right thing even when the world gave them every reason not to. And when he found them, he rewarded them. Sometimes with jobs. Sometimes with investments in their ideas. Sometimes with direct financial help. And sometimes with diamonds. The test wasn't planned, exactly. Marcus had been in town for business, meetings with a potential distributor. He'd stopped at the Rosewood Diner for breakfast because it was close to his hotel and he preferred authentic places to the corporate chains. He'd sat at table 12 with no expectations, no agenda. And then he'd watched Miriam. Watched her for 1 hour. Watched her treat every single person with respect. Watched her help without being asked. Watched her maintain grace under pressure, kindness despite exhaustion. Watched her quietly pay for a homeless man's coffee out of her own tips. That last act had decided it. Marcus had made his fortune, had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, but he remembered what it was like to count pennies. Remembered his mother doing exactly what Miriam had done, giving when she had nothing to give. That kind of generosity, the kind that costs you something, that's real. That's character. So he'd left the diamond. A raw stone from his personal collection, worth $150,000. Worth more than that, really, because it was rare, a nearly flawless stone with exceptional color. He'd placed it exactly where Miriam would find it, where she'd have a choice. He'd left his business card tucked under the edge of the table, partially hidden. A test within a test. Would she find it? Would she call? Then he'd left and waited. The diamond had a microscopic security signature, a technology Webb diamond collections had pioneered. Each stone could be tracked if it entered the market. It was meant for theft prevention, for insurance purposes. But it also meant Marcus would know what happened to his gift. He'd expected a call within hours. Expected Miriam to find the card, to reach out, confused and overwhelmed but honest. He'd planned to explain everything, to offer her a position in his company's administrative offices, to change her life in one conversation. Instead, silence. Days passed. No call. The diamond's signature remained dormant, not entered into any system. Marcus started to wonder if he'd made a mistake. Maybe Miriam had kept the diamond but was afraid to sell it. Maybe she'd thrown it away thinking it was fake. Maybe, his least favorite possibility, she'd decided to keep it without any intention of finding the owner. He hoped not. He was usually good at reading people. His mother had taught him that too. Then, 12 days after he'd left the diner, the signature pinged. The diamond had been sold to a private buyer in the underground market, the kind of transaction that happened when someone wanted to avoid questions about provenance. Marcus's disappointment was profound. He'd been wrong about Miriam. She'd seemed so genuine, so honest, but she'd kept the diamond and sold it illegally. Another reminder that you can't always judge character correctly, except something felt off. The sale price was wrong. The diamond had sold for $47,000, a fraction of its value. Anyone with access to legitimate appraisers would have known it was worth more, would have held out for better offers, would have been smarter about the sale. Marcus made a call. He had connections everywhere, including in law enforcement. The buyer was located, questioned, and gave up the seller without much pressure. A man named Stephen Morrison, manager of the Rosewood Diner. Not Miriam. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe, or vindication. He immediately hired a private investigator to look into what had happened. The investigation was thorough. Security footage from the diner showed Miriam finding the diamond. Showed her immediate reaction, confusion and concern. Showed her going directly to the back office. Showed her handing it over to Steve Morrison. The footage showed her character, showed her honesty playing out in real time. Interview with other staff revealed that Miriam had asked about the diamond days later. That Steve had told her it had been returned to the owner. That she'd seemed genuinely happy about that, relieved that the story had a happy ending. She'd been lied to, betrayed, stolen from. Marcus felt a rage he rarely experienced. This woman had done everything right, had passed his test with flying colors, had given up $150,000 because it wasn't hers to keep, and her reward had been theft, deception, continued poverty while the man who stole from her paid his gambling debts. Unacceptable. Marcus didn't just want justice. He wanted Steve Morrison to understand exactly what he'd done. Wanted him to face consequences not just for theft, but for stealing from someone who'd proven herself honest. For taking advantage of someone's integrity. He pressed charges, provided evidence. The microscopic signature, the sale records, the security footage. It was an airtight case. Steve was arrested at work. A deliberate choice on Marcus's part. Let everyone see. Let them know what happens when you steal from honest people. But that was only the beginning. Marcus started looking into Miriam's life. Not in a creepy way, but in the way a potential employer might. Background checks, public records. What he found made his determination stronger. A widow, single mother, working minimum wage at a diner. Medical debt, facing eviction, daughter's birthday coming up. And despite all of it, despite every reason to keep that diamond, to solve all her problems with one decision, she'd turned it in. That was the kind of person Marcus wanted in his life. In his company, in his world. He found out where she lived, found out her schedule, and he planned his approach carefully. Because you don't just show up at someone's door with life-changing news. You don't ambush people who've been through trauma, who've been betrayed. You do it right. But first, he had to make sure Steve Morrison faced full consequences. Not just arrest, but prosecution, conviction. A clear message that stealing from honest people carries weight. The trial was fast. Steve's lawyer tried to negotiate, to plead to lesser charges. But Marcus's legal team was better. They presented evidence of Steve's gambling debts, his expensive purchases right after the diamond sale. They showed the security footage of Miriam's honesty. They made it clear this wasn't just theft, it was exploitation of someone's integrity. Steve was convicted, sentenced to 18 months in prison. Would have been longer, but his lawyer convinced the judge he'd shown remorse. Would pay restitution. Restitution. As if Steve had anything close to $150,000 to repay. But Marcus wasn't interested in getting money from Steve. He was interested in justice. And more importantly, in making things right with Miriam. The woman who'd given up a fortune because it wasn't hers. The woman who reminded him of his mother. The woman whose life he was about to change. If she'd let him. Marcus Webb had built an empire on quality and character. And he'd just found someone who embodied the second principle perfectly. Someone worth investing in. Someone who deserved a miracle. And this time, no one was going to steal it from her. The knock on Miriam's door came on a Saturday morning. Linda's birthday. The day Miriam had been dreading and trying to make special simultaneously. She'd baked a cake from a box mix, had wrapped 2 small presents, a book and a puzzle, in newspaper because wrapping paper felt like an unnecessary expense. She'd put up streamers from the dollar store and was trying to make their tiny apartment feel festive. Linda was still asleep. Miriam was in the kitchen, staring at the cake and wondering why doing her best never felt like enough. When someone knocked, she opened the door expecting a neighbor, maybe the landlord with more bad news, and instead found herself face to face with the man from table 12, the stranger who'd left the diamond, who'd changed her life without her knowing it, who'd been there 3 months ago but felt like a lifetime away. "Ms. Miriam," he said, "my name is Marcus Webb. I believe we need to talk." Miriam's hands started shaking. She knew who he was now. Detective Rodriguez had explained everything. This was the man who'd left her $150,000. The man whose gift had been stolen. The man who'd gotten Steve arrested. She started, then stopped. "I'm sorry. I turned it in. I did the right thing." "I know you did," Marcus said gently. "That's exactly why I'm here. May I come in?" Miriam looked at her apartment, at the shabby furniture and peeling paint, at the birthday decorations that suddenly seemed pathetic. Then she looked at this man in his expensive clothes, and she felt the familiar shame of poverty, the feeling that she needed to apologize for not having more. But Marcus's face held no judgment, only kindness. She let him in. They sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd cried over eviction notices, where she'd helped Linda with homework, where she'd made impossible calculations trying to make her paycheck stretch. Marcus sat in the wobbly chair like it was a throne, like he was honored to be there. He told her everything, about watching her that morning, about being moved by her kindness to strangers, about his mother, who'd worked as a maid, who'd taught him that character was everything, about leaving the diamond specifically for her, about his rage when he discovered it had been stolen. "I left you my business card too," he said, tucked under the table edge. "I hoped you'd find it, call me, but Steve must have taken that too." Miriam put her face in her hands. She'd been so close to having her life change, and it had been taken from her by someone she'd trusted. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and his voice was thick with genuine emotion. "I'm sorry that my gift brought you pain instead of joy. I'm sorry you were betrayed for doing the right thing. I'm sorry it took so long to make this right." "You don't have to apologize," Miriam said. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Neither did you," Marcus replied. "That's the point. You did everything right. You found something valuable and immediately turned it in. You didn't hesitate. You didn't rationalize. You didn't let your circumstances, which I now know were difficult, compromise your integrity. That's extraordinary." Miriam laughed, but it came out broken. "I'm not extraordinary. I'm barely making it. I'm about to be evicted. It's my daughter's birthday and I can't even afford a proper present. I did the right thing and it cost me everything." "Cost you nothing," Marcus said firmly. "Steve Morrison stole from you. That's not the same as you losing something through your choices. Your integrity is intact. Your character is intact. And now, if you'll let me, I'd like to make things right." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, placed it on the table between them. "Inside this envelope is a check for $150,000. The value of the diamond that was meant for you. It's yours. No strings attached. You can take it and I'll leave and you'll never see me again if that's what you want." Miriam stared at the envelope, couldn't touch it, couldn't breathe. "But," Marcus continued, "I'm hoping you'll hear me out on a second offer." He explained about Webb Diamond Collections, about his administrative offices that handled everything from customer relations to event planning to community outreach, about a position that had just opened up, a salaried position with health insurance and retirement benefits, a position that paid $60,000 a year to start. "You'd be perfect for it," Marcus said. "The job requires someone detail-oriented, someone who works well with people, someone with integrity. I've watched you work. I've investigated your background. You're exactly who I need." Miriam couldn't speak. couldn't process what she was hearing. There's more, Marcus said. He pulled out another envelope. This one contains information about Webb Foundation scholarships. Full academic scholarships for dependents of Webb Diamond Collections employees. Your daughter, Linda, would be eligible. Preschool through university, fully funded. Why? Miriam finally managed. Why are you doing this? Because my mother was you, Marcus said simply. She worked 3 jobs. She sacrificed everything. She stayed honest when dishonesty would have been easier. And I never got to repay her. She died before I could give her the life she deserved. So now, when I find people like her, people like you, I do what I can. It's not charity. It's justice. It's the universe finally balancing the scales. Tears were streaming down Miriam's face. She thought about every hard day, every impossible choice, every moment she'd wondered if honesty was worth it. Thought about holding that diamond and choosing to turn it in. Thought about the cost of that choice. And now the reward. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Marcus replied. Say yes to the check. Say yes to the job. Say yes to letting me help give you and your daughter the life you deserve. Behind them, a small voice spoke up. Mama, Linda had woken up, was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, looking confused at the stranger in their kitchen. Miriam opened her arms and Linda ran to her. Miriam held her daughter tight, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, feeling the solid reality of her. This person she'd been fighting for every single day. Linda, Miriam said, her voice breaking. Remember when I asked you what you'd do if you found something valuable? Give it back, Linda said immediately, because that's what good people do. Miriam looked at Marcus over her daughter's head. Looked at this man who'd tested her, who'd believed in her, who'd fought to make things right. Yeah, Miriam said, that's what good people do. And sometimes, baby, just sometimes, good things happen to good people. She reached out and took the envelope, took the job offer, took the scholarship information, took the second chance she'd earned through integrity. Marcus smiled. And in that smile was satisfaction, was peace, was the feeling of honoring his mother's memory in the best way he knew how. Welcome to Webb Diamond Collections, he said. When can you start? Is Monday too soon? Miriam asked, and she was laughing and crying simultaneously. Monday is perfect, Marcus said. He stayed for Linda's birthday party, sat in the wobbly chair and ate cake from a box mix and sang happy birthday to a little girl who had no idea yet how completely her life had just changed, who would go to good schools and have opportunities and never have to watch her mother cry over bills, who would learn through living example that integrity matters, that honesty pays, that sometimes the universe keeps better accounts than we think. Steve Morrison sat in a cell, his trial over, his sentence beginning. He'd lost everything through greed and theft, had destroyed his life trying to solve problems that were ultimately solvable through honest means. Miriam had gained everything through honesty, through one choice, one moment of integrity that had cost her nothing but fear and had earned her everything that mattered. Justice isn't always obvious, isn't always immediate. Sometimes it takes months. Sometimes it requires investigation and intervention and someone like Marcus Webb who refuses to let dishonesty win. But it comes. Eventually, in ways we can't predict, the scales balance. 6 months later, Miriam barely recognized her own life. The new apartment had 2 bedrooms. Linda had her own space, decorated with posters and books and a desk where she did homework without having to clear away dinner dishes first. The heating worked. The air conditioning worked. The neighbors were quiet. The neighborhood was safe. Miriam walked to work still, not because she had to, but because she'd bought the apartment only 3 blocks from Webb Diamond Collections' administrative offices. She'd used part of the money Marcus gave her for a down payment. invested the rest in a savings account for emergencies and Linda's future. She was building security, real security, for the first time in years. The job was everything Marcus had promised. Challenging but rewarding. She coordinated community events, managed customer relations, worked with a team that respected her input and valued her perspective. The health insurance meant she could finally address some medical issues she'd been ignoring. The retirement plan meant she could think about a future beyond just surviving to next month. Linda thrived. She'd enrolled in a better school, made friends, joined the art club. Her birthday bicycle, purchased without guilt or calculation, sat in their apartment building's storage area. She rode it on weekends, Miriam watching from a bench, still sometimes unable to believe this was real. But what surprised Miriam most was the ripple effect. Her story had spread. Not because she'd sought attention, she'd actively avoided media interviews, but because Marcus had implemented something new at Webb Diamond Collections. The Integrity Award. Once a quarter, the company recognized and rewarded service industry workers who demonstrated exceptional honesty, servers who returned lost items, janitors who found and reported valuable objects, retail workers who went above and beyond to help customers. Each recipient received a financial award and consideration for employment opportunities within the Webb organization. It was Miriam's idea, actually, suggested during a staff meeting when Marcus asked how they could better serve their community. She'd thought of all the people like her, working hard, staying honest, getting overlooked, thought about how one recognition, one reward could change everything. Marcus had loved it, implemented it immediately, and now every quarter someone's life changed. Someone's integrity got recognized. Someone learned that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, matters. Miriam helped coordinate the program, reviewed nominations, met with recipients, shared her story when it felt appropriate. She'd become, without seeking it, a symbol, proof that character counts, that honesty isn't naive or foolish but powerful and worthy of reward. The woman who'd paid for the homeless man's coffee visited once. She'd seen Miriam at a company event, recognized her, and asked to talk. She cried when Miriam explained what had happened, said she'd been struggling too, had been tempted to compromise her values, but Miriam's example had stopped her. That moment meant more to Miriam than the money, than the job, than anything, because it meant her choice mattered beyond her own life. Meant that staying honest in a dishonest moment had inspired someone else to do the same. Steve Morrison was released after serving 14 months. Miriam heard through the diner grapevine. She still kept in touch with her former coworkers. She felt no satisfaction in his imprisonment, no joy in his fall, just sadness that he'd chosen greed over integrity, that he'd hurt people for temporary gain. She hoped he'd learn something, hoped he'd rebuild his life better. But that wasn't her responsibility. Her responsibility was to keep showing up, keep doing right, keep being the kind of person Linda could be proud of. Marcus had become more than an employer. He'd become a mentor, a friend. He attended Linda's school events when his schedule allowed, sent birthday cards, checked in regularly, not in an intrusive way, but in the way of someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. He'd found others too. Other people like Miriam, was building a company culture based not just on profit but on character. It was working. Webb Diamond Collections was growing, not despite this focus on integrity but because of it. Customers trusted them. Employees stayed. The reputation built on quality and character was paying dividends in every measurable way. One afternoon, Miriam sat in Marcus's office for their weekly check-in. He asked how she was doing, really doing, and she took a moment to answer honestly. "I'm happy," she said, and realized it was true. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time since David died, she was genuinely happy. Not just surviving, Not just managing. Happy. Marcus smiled. That's all I wanted, he said. To give you what you earned. I didn't earn this, Miriam said. I did what anyone should do. That's exactly the point, Marcus replied. What anyone should do, most people don't. You did. And that made all the difference. If you've watched this whole story, if you've stayed with Miriam from her darkest moments to this redemption, thank you. Thank you for believing that stories like this matter. That integrity counts. That sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing leads to the right outcome. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Tell us what this story means to you. Share your own moments of choosing honesty over convenience. Because every comment, every share, every person who hears the story, it creates another ripple. Another reminder that character matters. Maybe someone needs to hear that today. Maybe someone is facing a choice between what's easy and what's right. Maybe Miriam's story will be the thing that tips the scale. Maybe that someone is you. Miriam still works at Webb Diamond Collections. Still lives 3 blocks away. Still makes sure Linda knows that who you are matters more than what you have. Still believes, despite everything she went through, that the universe keeps better accounts than we think. She's not rich. The $150,000 wisely invested and budgeted provided security but not luxury. She still watches her spending, still shops sales, still remembers what it felt like to choose between medicine and meals. But she's safe. Linda is safe. Their future is safe. And she did it without compromising who she is, without sacrificing her integrity, without becoming someone her daughter couldn't admire. That's worth more than any diamond. That's worth everything. The stranger who left a diamond on a poor waitress's table changed her life. But Miriam had changed his too, reminded him why he did what he did, why character mattered, why building a business on integrity wasn't just good ethics but good sense. And together they were changing more lives, creating more ripples, proving that in a world that often seems to reward the wrong things, sometimes beautifully, wonderfully, miraculously, it rewards the right things too. You just have to stay honest long enough to see it. Until our next incredibly heartwarming story tomorrow, do stay blessed.